The wife was sure she had won, knowing her husband was broke. But her plan fell apart when a lawyer with documents sat down next to him and stated, "He doesn't have to afford me. He's the sole heir to his uncle, who left him a vast inheritance." She thought she was divorcing a pauper, but in reality, she had lost her chance at a fortune. The moment Victoria's carefully constructed world of financial leverage crumbled was a sight to behold. It wasn't a loud, shattering collapse, but a quiet, almost imperceptible implosion, one that was visible only to those who knew exactly what to look for. And I, the narrator of this tale, knew everything. I had been there from the start, a silent observer of their twisted courtship and a witness to the subtle decay of a man's spirit. I saw the calculated smile that played on Victoria's lips, the one she wore with the same ease as her diamond-encrusted earrings. She had crafted her victory with a surgical precision that would have been admirable had it not been so cruel. But now, as the distinguished figure of a man in a charcoal suit settled beside her unsuspecting husband, the first crack appeared in her flawless facade. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment when Victoria and Aaron first met. It was at a charity gala, a place where people of a certain social standing came to see and be seen. Victoria, a budding social media personality with a talent for making other people's lives look aspirational, was on the prowl. She moved through the crowd with the effortless grace of a shark, her eyes scanning for a target of opportunity. Aaron was not her usual prey. He was a software engineer, brilliant but unassuming, with a quiet demeanor that made him practically invisible in a room full of polished extroverts. He had inherited a small but successful tech firm from his father and possessed a modest but comfortable fortune. He was, in Victoria's cold calculus, a diamond in the rough, unpolished, naive, and brimming with potential she could exploit. She approached him with a practiced warmth, her smile reaching her eyes in a way that fooled everyone. She spoke of her passion projects, her dreams of building a brand, and her desire for a partner who understood her artistic vision. Aaron was smitten. He had never met anyone so vibrant, so full of life. She was everything he wasn't, and he was completely and utterly captivated. I watched as he fell, not into love, but into a meticulously laid trap. Their courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, luxurious vacations, and constant affirmations from Victoria about their shared future. She wove a narrative of a partnership, a union of two souls destined for greatness. He, in his guileless way, believed her. He was so eager to please her, to live up to the fantasy she was creating, that he never questioned the rapidly escalating expenses. He bought her the designer clothes she said were necessary for networking. He paid for the extravagant trips to exotic locales she called research. He funded her startup, a fledgling lifestyle blog that hemorrhaged money faster than he could pour it in. The first major red flag, a beacon visible to everyone but Aaron, was the house. Victoria insisted they needed a grand, sprawling estate in the most exclusive part of town. It was, she argued, a joint investment in their future, a place where they could entertain clients and build their empire. In reality, it was a colossal financial drain, a mansion that sucked his savings dry. The mortgage payments were exorbitant, the maintenance costs staggering. Aaron's own modest apartment, a place that truly felt like home, was sold to fund this grand illusion. I saw the shadow of doubt flicker in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by Victoria's soothing reassurances. "It's what successful people do, darling. We're building our legacy." But the real masterpiece of her manipulation was the systematic isolation. Victoria didn't just separate him from his money. She separated him from his support system. She subtly discouraged his friendships, claiming his friends were negative or holding him back. She invented conflicts with his family, twisting innocent conversations into personal attacks against her. His kind-hearted mother became overbearing. His loyal brother, Daniel, was jealous of their happiness. She was so effective at her craft that Aaron, a man who once had a tight-knit circle, found himself with no one to turn to but her. He was an island, and she was his only bridge to the mainland. This went on for 3 years. 3 years of a slow, steady bleed of his finances and his spirit. Victoria grew bolder with each passing month, seeing how easily she could control him. She took over the management of his company's finances, claiming her business acumen was superior to his accountant's. He, blinded by his desire to make her happy, agreed. Under her management, the company's profits magically disappeared into various shell corporations and Victoria's personal accounts. She told him it was all for tax purposes, a clever way to hide their money from the government. He believed her. By the time she finally served him with divorce papers, he was a shell of his former self, a man who genuinely believed he was broke and a failure. The moment she presented him with the papers, her voice was laced with a feigned sadness that barely masked her glee. "I just can't do this anymore, Aaron. We're on different paths. You can't even afford to fight me." The words were meant to be a final, crushing blow. He nodded, his eyes vacant. "You're right," he said. "I can't afford a lawyer to fight you." And in that moment, she was truly triumphant. She had won, or so she thought. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was the other, far more complex game that was being played in the shadows. A game set in motion years before she ever laid eyes on Aaron. This game belonged to Aaron's uncle, Julian. Julian was a peculiar man, a quiet genius who had spent his life amassing a fortune in ways that few people understood. He dealt in obscure financial instruments, antique collections, and vast tracts of undeveloped land in the American West. He was a billionaire, but he lived like a hermit, shunned the spotlight, and held a deep-seated distrust of anyone who valued money above all else. His greatest fear was that his immense wealth would fall into the hands of a schemer, someone who would prey on the goodness of his only living relative, his nephew Aaron. Julian had always seen a special quality in Aaron, a kindness, a resilience, a guileless nature that he knew could be both a strength and a weakness. He saw the world weariness in Aaron's eyes when he spoke of his father's passing, a grief that no amount of money could fix. Julian knew that Aaron would be a target, a lamb among wolves, and so he devised a plan so intricate, so clever, that only a few trusted individuals in the world knew about it. One of them was his lawyer and executor of his will, a man named Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes was a titan in the world of trust law, a man whose reputation for discretion was as vast as the fortunes he managed. Julian had hand-picked him, trusting his legal genius and his unflinching morality. Julian's instructions were clear. The inheritance was to be held in a blind trust, completely invisible to the outside world. It was a multi-layered, multi-jurisdictional financial fortress that could only be accessed under one specific, and for Aaron, devastatingly personal condition. The will stipulated that Aaron would only gain full control of the inheritance if he was legally separated from any spouse who had married him within the last 3 years and who had initiated a divorce proceeding citing financial instability or a lack of assets. In short, the will was a test. If a woman married Aaron for his money and then left him when she thought he had none, she would be disinherited completely. But if she stayed, if she loved him for who he was, she would be granted a small fortune of her own from a separate, smaller trust. Julian had believed in the power of a woman's love, and he wanted to see if Aaron had found it. He wanted to be sure that the vast legacy he had built would go to someone who was truly deserving. When Julian passed away a year before the divorce, Mr. Hayes was tasked with executing the will. He met with Aaron in secret, explaining the complex legal setup. Aaron, still in the throes of his infatuation with Victoria, was initially bewildered. "But she would never do that," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "She loves me, Mr. Hayes." The lawyer's face remained impassive. "Julian trusted your judgment, but he trusted his own even more. He wanted to protect you from the possibility of misfortune." Aaron, still so deeply in love, dismissed the notion, but agreed to follow the plan. He didn't understand the full implications, but he respected his uncle's wishes. He agreed to maintain the charade of financial distress, not knowing it would be a test of his wife's love or lack thereof. And so the game began. As Victoria systematically drained his accounts, Aaron, under the guidance of Mr. Hayes, played his part. He faked financial distress, feigned confusion over his dwindling savings, and even let his company appear to be on the verge of collapse. It was a gut-wrenching performance, one that ate away at his soul. He watched his wife's eyes light up with a greed she couldn't hide, and slowly, the love he had for her began to die, replaced by a cold, numbing horror. The more she took, the more he realized Julian had been right all along. She wasn't his soulmate. She was his executioner. By the time she served him with the papers, he was ready. He had prepared himself for the final act of this heartbreaking play. He knew that today, in this very courtroom, the final shoe would drop. He saw her smile, the one that used to make his heart race, and felt nothing but an empty ache. He had lost everything, and yet he was about to gain so much more. The courtroom was quiet. The judge, a stoic woman with a no-nonsense air, looked on, her face giving nothing away. Victoria's lawyer, a slick, expensive man named Mr. Grant, was in the middle of his opening statement, his voice dripping with condescension. He was painting a picture of an irresponsible, financially reckless husband who had squandered their shared fortune, leaving his hard-working wife with nothing. It was a narrative Victoria had meticulously crafted, filled with fabricated invoices and doctored bank statements. "As the evidence clearly shows, Your Honor," Mr. Grant said, gesturing to a stack of folders on the table, "my client, Mrs. Victoria Adams, has been forced to file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, which are, in this case, rooted in Mr. Adams's inability to provide for their shared lifestyle and his persistent financial mismanagement. He is, to put it plainly, indigent." The word hung in the air, a final public humiliation. Victoria's smile widened. She had won. She was getting the house, a significant portion of what was left of his liquidated assets, and a clean break from what she considered a failed investment. But then the doors to the courtroom opened, and in walked a man who seemed to command the space without even trying. He was older, with kind eyes and a face that looked like it held 1,000 secrets. He held a leather-bound briefcase in one hand and a thick, manila folder in the other. He walked directly to Aaron's table, ignoring the stunned looks from Mr. Grant and Victoria. He sat down and calmly placed the manila folder on the table, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He offered Aaron a small, reassuring smile, a gesture that immediately eased the tension in Aaron's shoulders. Mr. Grant, flustered by the interruption, cleared his throat. "And who might you be?" he asked, his voice laced with a thinly veiled irritation. The man looked at him, his gaze calm and unwavering. "My name is Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I'm a lawyer." He then turned his attention to the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. My presence here is a matter of urgent and pressing importance regarding this case." The judge, intrigued, nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Hayes." He then looked at Victoria's lawyer and, for the first time, a hint of steel entered his voice. "My client doesn't have to afford me. He's the sole heir to his uncle, Julian Adams, who left him a vast and unconditional inheritance. An inheritance that, I might add, far exceeds the combined net worth of everyone in this room." A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. Victoria's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. Her lawyer, Mr. Grant, stared at Mr. Hayes, his face a mask of disbelief. "This is preposterous. My client has been with him for 3 years. She has a right to half of his assets." Mr. Hayes chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He slowly opened the manila folder and extracted a document. But you see, that's where the beauty of this plan lies. Julian Adams was a man who planned for every contingency. The will stipulates that Aaron's inheritance is held in a blind trust, completely untouchable by anyone else. The moment his marriage of less than 3 years ends in divorce, and the reason for that divorce is financial instability, as your client has claimed, the trust is released into his sole possession. It's a test, you see, and your client, by her own greedy actions, has just passed it for him. She proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that she married him for his money. Victoria, who had been listening in a stunned silence, finally found her voice. "This is a lie. He's lying. We worked together. We built our life together." Mr. Hayes's gaze fixed on her, and for the first time, she saw a chilling coldness in his eyes. "Every expense, Mrs. Adams, every financial transaction you've made in the past 3 years, every account you've opened in a shell corporation. We have it all. We have documented every single one of your expenditures, every one of your investments, every one of your financial manipulations. We have the tax records, the bank statements, the emails. You were so convinced of your own brilliance that you never considered the possibility that someone was watching you. Your husband was never indigent. He was simply living a life that you thought he was living. It was all a test, and you failed. Miserably." The courtroom was buzzing with whispers. The judge, her impassive mask finally cracking, looked at Victoria with a more piercing gaze. Mr. Grant, pale and visibly shaken, stumbled back to his seat, his eyes darting between the thick file and his client. The truth, in all its devastating glory, was laid bare for all to see. The following weeks were a blur of legal maneuvers, each one of them a nail in Victoria's coffin. Mr. Hayes, true to his word, had a mountain of evidence. He had proof of every fabricated invoice, every hidden transaction, every penny she had siphoned away. The case that had once seemed like a guaranteed win for Victoria had turned into a public spectacle of her downfall. She was not only denied any claim to Aaron's newfound fortune, but she was also facing a potential lawsuit from Aaron's family for fraud. The friends she had made through her lavish lifestyle, the ones who had flocked to her when she seemed to have it all, now shunned her. Her social media empire, the very foundation of her existence, crumbled as news of her deceit spread like wildfire. The empire she had so gleefully built turned out to be nothing more than a house of cards. Aaron, on the other hand, was reborn. The quiet, broken man who had walked into the courtroom was replaced by a man who was finally free. The weight of Victoria's manipulation, the constant anxiety of living a lie, had been lifted. He used his new fortune not to flaunt his wealth, but to do something meaningful. He founded a charitable organization in his Uncle Julian's name, dedicated to helping small businesses and entrepreneurs who had been scammed by larger, predatory corporations. He reconnected with his family and friends, mending the bridges that Victoria had so cruelly burned. He would often sit in the quiet solitude of the family cabin his uncle had left him, a place Victoria had deemed too rustic, and think about the twisted journey his life had taken. He had lost 3 years of his life, 3 years he could never get back. But he had gained so much more. He had learned the true value of trust, the devastating power of deceit, and the quiet resilience of a man who, against all odds, had found his way back to himself. And Victoria? She was last seen in a small apartment, far from the grand mansion she had so coveted. She had won the battle for the house, but she had lost the war for her soul. She had thought she was divorcing a pauper, but in reality, she had lost her chance at a fortune. Not just the one in the will, but the one she had with a man who, in his quiet way, had been a fortune all along. Some people are so focused on getting to the destination that they miss the journey, and some are so obsessed with the prize that they fail to see that they've lost something far more valuable in the process.